I would like to recognize first the executive officer that is here with us of the Academy of Science of South Africa, Professor Himla Sudiao. Recognize all the distinguished speakers that will be sharing their knowledge and expertise with us this afternoon, and that will be Professor Helen Rees, Professor Glenda Gray, Professor Ndobego Ndusi, Professor Telsa Palani Phillips, and Professor Slim Abdul Karim. All to you distinguished colleagues that are here, esteemed researchers, ladies and gentlemen, good day to you all. I just want to announce at this stage that Prof. Karim might be joining us a bit late because of an emergency that he had to attend to at the 11th hour. My name is Thokozan Majosi. I'm the president and chairperson of the Academy of Science of South Africa. Colleagues, this purports to be one of the most critical moments in our research community. The recent funding reductions from the United States represent one of the most significant challenges to our collaborative research infrastructure in recent memory. These cuts affect not just abstract budgets and programs, but tangible research projects, dedicated personnel who are employed in these projects, and ultimately the communities that benefit from scientific advancement. As scientists and research leaders, we understand that consistent and reliable funding forms the foundation of sustainable scientific progress. Now, when this foundation is shaken or is disrupted, the ripple effects extend far beyond individual projects. They impact our capacity to address pressing public health challenges. They impact on the training of the next generation of researchers. They also impact on our ability to maintain crucial databases and also affect our ability to sustain community partnerships that have taken years to develop. Now, South Africa's ecosystem of research and innovation has benefited tremendously from international partnerships, and foremost among which being our partnership with the United States of America, particularly in the space or realm of public health. Our efforts to combat HIV, tuberculosis, and other infectious diseases have relied on collaborative funding models that bring together expertise and resources from around the world. The sudden reduction or contraction of this support creates gaps that cannot be easily filled through existing mechanisms. As an academy committed to evidence-based solutions, we must move beyond simply acknowledging the challenge. Today's seminar is an opportunity to examine the full scope of these implications and to formulate constructive responses. We have to consider several issues here. How can South Africa research community adapt to mitigate these disruptions? What are the alternative funding mechanisms, perhaps, if there are any? How can we preserve research infrastructure and capacity that has been built over so many decades? We also have to perhaps ask our questions. What are the long-term implications for scientific collaboration and knowledge production? The strength of our scientific community has always been our ability to adapt. It has always been our ability to innovate and collaborate in the face of challenges. While the current situation is undoubtedly difficult, I'm confident that through dialogue and collective action, we can develop strategies to sustain the vital research work that improves lives across our nation. So for today's discussions, colleagues, I urge all of us to please approach this challenge with the urgency that it deserves, and of course, approach this with an element of strategic thinking. Our responses must be evidence-based, collaborative, and centered on maintaining the momentum of scientific progress in our country. I will now formally introduce Professor Helen Rees, who will be the moderator for this webinar. And I thank you, Helen, for agreeing to moderate this session. And later on, Professor Rees will introduce formally the other speakers that are also here with us this afternoon. Professor Helen Rees is the Executive Director of Vet Reproductive Health and HIV Institute, which is the largest research institute at the University of the Witwatersrand, and the co-director of the Vet African Leadership in Vaccinology Expertise. Helen is a leader in global health security and has served on and chaired many national and global scientific committees and boards. Currently, Helen chairs the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority Board, the World Health Organization Afro-Regional Immunization Technical Advisory Group, and the World Health Organization's International Health Regulations Emergency Committee on polio, among others. She co-chairs the Strategic Advisory Group of Experts on Ebola vaccines and the South African Incident Management Team on Mpox, overseeing the national response. She has recently been appointed as co-chair of the newly established World Health Organization Proxvirus Collaborating Center under the recently released Prioritized Pathogen Family Report by the World Health Organization R&D Blueprint. She's a member of the World Health Organization Scientific and Technical Advisory Group on Infectious Hazards and a member of the South African National Advisory Group on Immunization. Over to you, Helen.
Thank you very much, Prof. Majosi. And I'd really like to appreciate ASSAf for convening this. I'm just looking, we're nearly at 500 people online, which really does reflect the absolute importance and in a way, well, not in a way, the crisis that is facing us now and potentially worse crisis that could face us in the future. So thank you very much. And many of us on the panel are members of ASSAf, and I think we would all want to acknowledge this contribution. I think just to sort of launch off, just for the panelists before I introduce them one by one, just to say that to show the level of concern, I would say I have been in deep conversation with every single one of these panelists, late night conversations, weekend conversations, saying, and what do we do next? And how do we create and justify the argument for the importance of sustaining research in South Africa? I think I don't need to tell the 500 odd people on this line that South Africa is responsible for a huge amount of the research, the health research outputs in the African region. It's built up this whole reputation over, I would say, at least 30 years, probably, if we look back, many of us. It's not only HIV, TB, we have Prof. Ntusi here, and it's also non-communicable diseases, which into the future will become even more important. But for now, what we're looking at, and this panel will discuss, is what looks like the potential to lose literally billions of rands, and panelists will go into this further, and to lose potentially thousands of our science staff, our senior scientists. And as you said, Prof. Majosi, the sustainability of all the efforts over many years is now under threat. So I'm going to start, and I'll encourage everyone to look at I'm sure you've all seen this very detailed set of bios. So I won't go into everyone's bios. I'd encourage you to look, but only to say that this is an incredibly eminent group of scientists who we are talking to, all world famous, all leaders of major global financing awards, research awards, and all leading major enterprises. So I'll start with introducing Prof. Ntobeko Ntusi, who I think everyone will know now as the President and CEO of the South African Medical Research Council. But he was very well known previously as the chair and the head of the Department of Medicine at UCT in Groote Schuur Hospital, and is globally renowned for his work in this field and in non-communicable diseases. I'm going to ask, I'll introduce each one of you as I get to you, but I'm going to ask the same question to all of you to begin with. And that is, first of all, just a 5-minute summary of how the current cuts have actually affected yourselves. And then I've got a couple of other questions. So 5 minutes first. I will be tough on time because I want to ask you a lot of questions about the impact that this is having, both continentally and globally. So Prof. Ntusi, over to you.
Helen, thank you very much for the generous introduction. And
We might need to get you closer
that
to
better?
the mic, even closer.
Yeah, is that any better?
If you
Wow.
shout.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that warm and generous introduction. And like you, I wish to echo my warm words of appreciation to the Academy for convening this timely and important conversation. One of the greatest exponents of South Africa to the world has been a thriving research enterprise that has made important contributions that are good, not just for South Africa, but for the whole world. And as the custodians of health research in the country, one of our key areas of focus as the SAMRC at this moment is how we preserve that generation of leading scientists. So to reflect briefly on the impact of the withdrawal of the US funding on the SAMRC, in a major fashion, it has impacted on the Brilliant Consortium, and I won't touch on that. I will leave that to Glenda to speak more in detail about. But secondly, it's also impacted on collaborative research that the SAMRC undertakes with major US partners like the universities in Columbia and Johns Hopkins, who have lost $600 and $800 million respectively in the last week. In addition, we have a large number of CDC and NIH grants with almost 200 staff on these. Therefore, amongst our staff, there have been very high levels of anxiety. And as the rumors are swirling around uncertainty about the future of these programs in South Africa, we've had to contend with the psychological stress of our workforce. And of course, you will know that almost a third of our contract income as the SAMRC comes from the NIH for this current financial year. And so this is an area of great concern. But lastly, we've needed to cut back on affected research operations. And we've also had some job losses and again, impact on livelihoods. And I must praise Glenda for substantially mitigating the impact of these in relation to the Brilliant Consortium. Helen, I'm going to stop there and thank you.
Thank you very much. And we'll obviously go into this further, but I'm glad that you mentioned the impact on people's mental health and the staff anxiety that everyone is living in under. So let me now go to Glenda, as you've just heard Ntobeko introduced her. I think everyone knows Prof. Glenda Gray as the past president and CEO of the MRC. And she's now the director of what's called IDORI, which is at Wits University, which is an infectious disease oncology research institute. But Glenda, as you heard, and she will talk to this, is directly affected, as are other panelists, because of, in her case, the stopping of funding of the Brilliant Consortium. Glenda, over to you. Okay, we're not hearing you. Now, why are we not hearing you? You're not muted. Let me see if they can assist. No, still nothing. Do you want to try and mute and unmute yourself again and see if that helps? Let's see. Try again. No, not hearing you. You're going to go to another. You'll go to another device. While you're doing that, I'll then go on to our next presenter. And Glenda, I'll come back to you. But as soon as you're on, just put your camera on and I'll know that you're back with us. So apologies, everyone. But I'm now going to then go to Prof. Tess Palani-Phillips, who I work with at Wits RHI, and she's here Director of Clinical Trials. But similarly to Glenda, Tess has been directly affected by the cutting off of a major program that was developing what are called multipurpose prevention technologies for the world, which was funded by USAID. So Tess, let me hand over to you. And if you can talk about what's happened to you and the impact on yourself, your staff, and your outputs.
Thanks so much, Helen. Thank you, everyone, for joining this call. It's good to see
we are having no luck.
so many people on. I think to start with...
Yes. Sorry to interrupt. You're also breaking up. We really are not having any luck today. Just try turning yourself on and off again, and then we'll see if we...
Can you hear me now? I've killed the camera.
Yeah, that's better.
That
Sorry, let's go do it without the camera, with apologies to everyone. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks so much, everyone, for joining. It's clear we're all in the same boat on the same turbulent sea. And so thank you to ASSAf firstly for inviting us to share some perspectives. And I think it would be remiss of me to not thank the American people who have been key to establishing PEPFAR and USAID and enabling so much of research to date. So the reason I'm on this call, and as Helen mentioned, is that I was very fortunate to be part of a large collaborative piece of work called Matrix. Matrix was a USAID-funded project that aimed to advance research and development of innovative HIV prevention products for women. And it was strongly focused on women because there was a dire need to ensure that the vision and mission of Matrix was clearly understood. And this really was to bring acceptable, affordable, scalable, and deliverable HIV prevention and dual prevention or multipurpose prevention technologies to those that needed it the most. And so this really did align, the entire collaborative did align with this mission to try and accelerate the portfolio of products that were coming through the pipeline. We were focused on very early R&D, and we did this through a North-South collaborative model. Myself as Deputy Director at FTSARHI, based in Johannesburg, and my partner, the lead on the entire program, based in the US, the McGee Women's Research Institute, Prof. Sharon Hillier. And the unique part about this is, and I think it aligns with much of what you'll hear today, was USA was deeply invested in enabling Global South leaders to grow and strengthen and to take lead in the development of future interventions. So the model here was unique in that we partnered North-South, and within the South, we had partners across Kenya, South Africa, Zimbabwe, as well as the US. Our product developers were based in the Global North, and one of the other exciting pieces about it was that it brought fellowships to African fellows and students that would enable them to do active pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturing. It also was aimed at transferring skills to Africa over a period of the initial 5-year award of the grant. And it really was meant to try and transfer skills to scholars to bring product development to the African region. So within the first, we were initially awarded a 5-year grant that started in 2021. And unfortunately, as you all know, we were halted on the 27th of January, which was the start of year 4. In December of last year, we were told that we would potentially be extended a further 4 years. And the initial award, we were awarded $125 million US. In the subsequent 4 years, it was an additional $80 million. So massive impact across South Africa, Kenya, Zimbabwe, as well as our African partners across all of our country. I know this call is meant to be focused on South Africa, but it really did extend to beyond implementation to our trial communities because we had active early phase trials in implementation. So quite devastating to have to shut trials down overnight and to really lose the support to advance science and development in our region. So massive impact for capacity development, massive impact for trials. Given that Africa is usually the place where people come to do phase 3 trials, we were doing groundbreaking work in bringing first-in-human trials and preclinical development to the region, but unfortunately stopped overnight. So maybe I'll take pause there, Helen, and pass to the next person.
Thank you. And I think I just want to highlight as well from what you said, Tess, is that at a time with the African Union post-COVID, I think everyone will recall very strongly that there's a call for African manufacturing of health products and vaccines. And manufacturing isn't just the building of a factory and the technical expertise into that level of production. It is the science that develops the products that goes into manufacturing. So the call from the AU that has been absolutely supported, the removal of something like matrix will undermine a lot of that as well. Let me then go to Glenda. Glenda, let's just try your mic before I introduce you again.
How does this sound, Helen? I'm on my mobile.
Thanks. Okay, so I'll just introduce Glenda Gray again. I think everyone knows Glenda Gray. She was the past head of the Medical Research Council and president, and now she's director of EDORI at WITS, which is looking at infectious diseases and oncology. And she was the co-lead of the brilliant consortium, which she'll also outline, of the impact of that and of some of the other work that she's been doing, looking at what might be the impact in the future. Glenda, over to you.
So thanks, Helen, and thanks Academy of Science for convening this, and thank you, Ntobeko, for your kind remarks. So I want to preface my input by saying that there's generally an assault on science, and I think we will see that this assault is not only going to be targeted at Africa but also we see this happening in the United States of America. So I want to make 3 points around this, around my role as a brilliant consortium. So the first point is that there's been a huge investment made in HIV and TB research by the NIH and the USAID together with local funders like the South African Medical Research Council and the NRF. And this has allowed South African scientists to respond rapidly to both HIV and TB issues and global threats, as we saw during COVID. So the NIH has given us around over 800 direct grants, and it's in the area of around 600,000 $600,000 per annum. And this research infrastructure, both lab-based.
Glenda, do you mean million?
Sorry, million. Sorry, million. Sorry. So I mean million. Sorry about that. And this research infrastructure and lab-based and clinical trial capacity is unparalleled on the continent, and has allowed us in the Brilliant Consortium to set up an 8-country program to do both HIV discovery vaccine work and expand laboratory capability throughout the continent. And it's allowed us to direct immunogen design, vaccine platform and vaccine manufacturing, as well as the preclinical and clinical testing. So we were just about to go into our first in Africa study at the end of January when we were terminated. And this grant represents around $46 million, which is about R1 billion, and affects scientists not only in South Africa, but in Nigeria, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Mozambique. And so all of us, where was tremendous capacity that we were able to contribute, has been cut off prematurely and has not allowed African science to show what they are capable of doing. And so I do think that this assault on science, is universal, and I think we need to make sure that we can protect and work in a diplomatic fashion to try and find ways and solutions to making sure that science continues to flourish in our country, in our continent, and in the United States of America.
Thank you very much. And I think you've said, and Tess said as well, and Ntobeko, I think the emphasis is also on the value of the investment prior. This has gone on for years. I mean, we're talking now about the loss of 2 huge current grants, but we've had years and years of support that's allowed, as Glenda said, HIV and TB research to really grow. And those scientists are now turning around and doing vaccine research, are doing therapeutics research, are doing infectious disease research more generally. So this is a long-standing investment that we've been really grateful to receive from the US. And it's not only, as you said, South Africa that is going to be affected by this. I want to just see if Slim has been able to join us. I don't see him. Am I correct?
No, Prof, he hasn't. I've also just checked.
Okay, no problem at all. So I'm going to go back to Ntobeko and say, we're also, and many of us have been involved in having discussions with yourself as the lead for the MRC about what the threats are in the future if other large funds are withdrawn. And we're particularly worried, obviously, about the NIH. We're all very much hoping that we can make the case why this ongoing investment is so important. But you have been looking at this. So I wonder if you could talk to us about what the threats might be in the future and what that might mean to South African research.
Well, thanks, Helen. So I wish to posit my thoughts in 5 domains. The first is that if I build initially on the thread that you and Glenda have ended on, the contribution of South Africa over decades to building a cadre of highly trained scientists of high repute who have been conducting science that is important for the whole world, and particularly strong in the domains of HIV and tuberculosis. And if you look at the pioneering contributions to scholarship, these span many areas, including understanding infection dynamics, epidemiology, immunology, and basic science mechanisms to clinical trials and effective therapies. You look at a drug like lenacapavir, where the studies were conducted here in South Africa and Uganda, and is now being used in many high-income countries, while our own population cannot access it. But also new therapeutics for TB, vaccines, but also treatment shortening therapies. And these are all important health innovations that come from our corner of the world. So what's the impact of these withdrawals on this enterprise? Well, many scientists may lose jobs, many may choose to emigrate, and many, particularly young scientists, may lose faith in science as a professional endeavor. And I think it is in all our interest to ensure that we do all we can to protect this group of scientists. The second point I wish to make is that the rapidity of the executive orders has meant that there has been almost no opportunity for mitigation. For example, the withdrawal of PEPFAR funding for support in South Africa without effectively transitioning to supported services means that over the next 10 years, over 600,000 HIV deaths are likely, and over 500,000 new infections. And these consequences, in my view, are likely to be more acutely felt in the rest of the African region, where treatment programs for HIV and TB were largely dependent on US donor and aid funding. And so the impact on programmatic care of HIV and TB will be felt deeply for many years to come. And again, if you look closer to South Africa, we have about 24,000 healthcare workers who summarily lost their jobs. Many of these are involved in HIV and TB treatment programs. And these were crucial staff who undertook the kinds of roles that clinicians within the National Department of Health do not provide. These included the screening and diagnosis of new patients, active case finding for tuberculosis, the management of vulnerable and key populations, but importantly also the provision of technical support to the department. The fourth area that I think warrants consideration is that if we are not able to act to fill devoid of this withdrawal of funds, we are likely to see both a derailing and a reversal of the many gains achieved in South Africa's hard-won fight against both HIV and TB. And this is likely to have a huge impact on HIV prevention, where many of us were quite excited that new therapeutics provide hope to significantly bring the virus down to its knees, but also research and development for vaccines for HIV and TB, inter alia other consequences. Then finally, I think an area that we all have to be concerned about is the next generation of clinicians and scientists and the impact that the withdrawal of these funds will have on the training of those who are likely to be future leaders in health research in this country and beyond. So let me stop there, Helen, and give others an opportunity.
Thank you. Tess, looking forward, if further cuts continue, what kind of impact do you feel, to add to what Ntobeko has just said?
Thanks, Helen. So, I mean, I look at it through a lens of looking at PEPFAR, USAID, and then NIH with two different focus areas. So when I think about PEPFAR, USAID funding, what we do recognize is that PEPFAR has been one of the largest procurers and implementers of biomedical HIV prevention, treatment and contraception. And so in the near term, what we see and are experiencing in many clinics, in many of the localities that we work in, is that people that used to come to specific spaces for access to prevention, treatment and contraception are now being limited. They're locked doors, no one to direct them on where to go to, aside from efforts that local teams are trying to put in place in the short term. The concern for me is that in the long term, this is going to lead to taking us many steps back in terms of HIV prevention efforts. We're likely going to see limited access to PrEP, leading to key populations being severely impacted and high rates of HIV acquisition happening. We're also going to see development of resistance for those that have been on treatment, which is a concern as we think about how do we take people from a concept of universal test and treat, but not having enough art and facilities and healthcare workers that are able to deliver this. So for me, the concern is that we're going to take massive steps back if we're not able to reel in very quickly and react and enable people to continue to initiate art, PrEP, and treatment and sustain this. The second area is NIH. As many of us on this call with NIH grants, the anxiety is huge in that while clinical trials have been highly enabling for capacity development, for giving people, a chance to contribute to solutions, it's also limiting in that you're not able to initiate your ideas. And the NIH mechanisms have enabled many of us to drive a portfolio of work that is very locally focused, investigator-driven initiatives that enable us to look at what we're experiencing in our clinics, in our trial sites, and develop questions with teams of African investigators and international investigators to drive a response to questions that will be locally informed. And for me, the concern is we understand the epidemiology, we understand the local context, and the NIH mechanism was really key to advancing our ability as African scientists to answer questions in a manner that would be extendable practically in our settings. And with that gateway potentially jeopardized, it then does limit the momentum of the work that we've achieved. I think for both aspects, be it the rollout of PrEP treatment and contraception to investigator-led initiatives, the biggest concern is the break in momentum. I often talk to my team at site about muscle, that, in order to build muscle in any space, you need to do it repeatedly. And I fear that when there's loss of muscle, because we're not actively engaging in the work, that we lose the potential to really impact the lives of people in our continent. And I think that's quite devastating for all of us on this call, and really do support efforts to engage mechanisms to ensure that the momentum isn't jeopardized. Thanks, Helen.
Thanks. And I can see appreciation for those comments as well. And I think your break in momentum is very important. I think many people are saying you can literally, in this case, turn things off overnight, but to turn them on again will take years. Glenda, would you like to come in? What do you see as potential threats and how this will play out into the future?
Sure. To add to the very important comments that.
Oh dear, we've lost Glenda.
Sorry.
There you are. No, you're back.
Am I there? Yeah.
Now you're back,
To the
yes.
very important points that have been made, is that I wanted to add 3 things. So what's not a lot well known is that USAID had an R&D program. And this R&D program helped develop a lot of the important products that Tess and I and Helen have tested, including tenofovir gel, including a multi-purpose technology to prevent pregnancies as well as STDs and HIV, and as well as a huge investment in HIV vaccines. So with the dismantling of USAID, we dismantle very important public good products, which I don't know if will ever be reinitiated. So that's a critical piece that impacts on public health. The other thing, just to add, is the issue of our work with the NIH. The only place where we can definitively answer questions around HIV treatment and HIV prevention, around cure, around whether a vaccine works or a microbicide works or a oral PrEP or long-acting antiretroviral works, or whether early treatment or task shifting can work is in South Africa. And so to get definitive answers on questions that have global impact, we need South Africa. So by disinvesting in South Africa means that we won't have the answers that could contribute to both global and local science. And Tess touched on this and the issue around how scientists in South Africa or in Africa were seen as partners, and so the importance of the co-creation. And so we were never ever just conducting research that was designed in the global north, but these opportunities with the NIH and USAID helped us to co-create scientific questions and address them so that we could impact at a global level the global issues that we face in HIV and TB. So over to you, Helen.
No, thank you. And the scale of what we're looking at, I mean, Glenda, you mentioned the 600 million. Yeah. And Ntobeko mentioned the PEPFAR and just the individual size of both the matrix and the mosaic grant. We're looking at a huge void that we're going to see lost. Do any of you, and this is obviously for all of you on the call, this is truly, it is a focus of concern for everyone who's on this panel and way beyond, saying, what can we do? Is it possible to fill the void? What do we do to actually consider that? And Ntobeko, would you like to come in here?
Helen, it's a huge void, and I don't think there is any singular partner in the global health space that can readily fill that void. And so my view is that the US is likely for many years to come to remain a major player in the space. And therefore it's important for the South African scientific community to keep their engagements with the US going. And these are along political, economic, but also scientific lines. And many of our collaborators and partners in the US have been expressing repeatedly their solidarity in the last 6 weeks, but feel powerless and overwhelmed with the current situation. And for them, an unprecedented shift in daily life and rapidly evolving daily realities, none of us could have predicted. And what we are seeing, they face as many threats to their own livelihoods and existence as we are facing in South Africa and other parts of the world. And so that would be my first recommendation, that we keep the engagements with the US and with our partners going. The second is that clearly the South African government has to contribute more. And we have ongoing discussions currently with the National Treasury, the National Department of Health, but also the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation and other partners on how to optimally support the research enterprise in this country. But there's also clearly a need for engagement with funders to demonstrate why support for South Africa matters. As you know, Africa is not only the youngest continent, median age of 19 years, but also the fastest growing population in the world, and also has amongst the largest burden of disease. Therefore, in the coming years, it's going to be the epicenter of science and the source of scientists and scientific personnel for the world. Therefore, funders have a vested interest in supporting that excellence is built locally. And along these lines, the SAMRC is planning to convene an extraordinary funders forum over the next few weeks to have exactly this conversation and to see how important players in the global health space can be able to support our country at this time. The universities are clearly very exposed, particularly the research-intensive ones like UCT and VETS. And it's clear that they are going to have very difficult conversations around how they use their existing staff optimally, preventing layoffs, but also finding efficiencies. And universities in particular, but all health research entities in the country will also need to build in place contingencies and plans and SOPs for ethically withdrawing staff from ongoing clinical trials and other research studies. And of course, it goes without saying, Helen, that we need to diversify our sources of funding. We need to be looking to Europe, to Asia, to the private sector in this country and outside, but also to philanthropy to support our thriving research enterprise. And I think we've all seen what the risks of over-reliance on a single funder can be. I also think that this current moment of difficulty presents us with an opportunity to build efficiencies in our system for how we optimally use resources. And I think there are a number of ways in which we can look at these efficiencies. The first is to look at how we much closer bring research activity alongside clinical activity, but also the integration in clinical care of infectious diseases with NCDs. And then thirdly, in areas where we conduct research, clinical research, to look at how we use our staff more efficiently, clinical staff, administrators, who can simultaneously contribute both to the research endeavor as they do to clinical care. And I feel particularly strongly about this point, that as the academy, we need to put in place strategies to safeguard the training of our students and the flourishing of early career scientists to ensure that South Africa maintains its rightful place as a key contributor to research and the impact of scholarship in the world. And then finally, I wish to reflect on the contributions of PEPFAR and USAID beyond employing over 250,000 doctors in 55 countries, as well as over 2 million community healthcare workers and nurses. They've built an infrastructure of laboratories that I think should be the pride of many working in research. And I think that the laboratories in this country and in other African countries can also in the future continue to serve as a stimulus for scientific advances and to support research, whether it's funded by the US or with different sources. So I'll stop there, but I think one needs to take a multimodal approach to how we think about mitigation in the current circumstances. And, clear from the comments I've made that I think this needs a whole of society approach, but also contributions from multiple sectors. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you. And I am looking at the chat as well. That was extremely well said. And just with respect, and Ntobeko, to your involvement of the departments, the one question in the chat says, what percentage of SA GDP is needed to close the loss? I think there are two questions here. One is that best practice is that I believe it's 1.5% of our GDP should go towards research, which we're not managing to achieve at the moment because of competing opportunities and threats. But to fill that void, I think what we've just heard is that we're not going to fill that amount of money. So therefore, we're going to have to be more strategic, more prioritization, and much sharper in the way we design things. Let me move to Tess. Can you look now and say how you see mitigation, some of the strategies that we could undertake to mitigate this void, given that we will not replace all of that funding?
Yeah, thank you so much, Helen. I think Prof. Nthusi has covered most of it, but just to reinforce some of it, I think what we're experiencing now across multiple institutions, across facilities, is massive job losses. And I think the immediate concern for many of us is how do we try to retain as many staff as possible? And I think many institutions are looking at innovative ways to reduce number of hours, keep some people employed on a fraction of their salaries. But we all understand that this is not sustainable for the next 3 to 5 years. And so in terms of efforts that many of us are making collectively in the South and then through North-South collaboration still, is really to diversify the funding pot while still focusing on the US pharma companies, where, I think Prof. Nthusi mentioned many of the and Glenda mentioned many of the registrational drug trials have taken place in Africa, in South Africa, Kenya, Zimbabwe, Uganda. And so that capacity to do those trials is still there. It may not be within the confines of USAID funding, but it can leverage US pharma companies and non-US pharma companies. So I think that is definitely a space that we all need to ensure that ongoing collaboration, reaching out to partners is there. I feel really hopeful about pharma companies as well, because what we've seen over the last 2 or 3 months is a rush of effort to try and enable not just global South African scientists, but also global North scientists that are now without NIH funding. So you see a lot of the pharma companies putting out calls to enable young scientists in the North to pursue ongoing investigator-led work. It would be helpful if we could find mechanisms on the African continent to do the same, to enable the NIH equivalent model to continue while we navigate what a turbulent seas. I think reaching out to partners in Europe, there's clearly a missed opportunity there. And even with the UK donors, we're seeing a number of calls come out, a lot of calls from the Gates Foundation come out. And while these may not be large pots of money to fill the immediate gap, they will start to fill portions of that. I think, we really need to leverage more South-South collaboration as well, reaching out to partners and building the science as much as possible through collaboration and coordination. And when we use a collective approach to, map forward, there's potentially a louder voice that is heard, and hopefully, together we can find solutions. Clearly, we're all in in dire straits right now, trying to think through the immediate needs, ensuring that the ongoing trials are run to the best of ability. And so we need to leverage any and all resources to channel them to responding to the immediate need. I think what we have also learned is that during COVID, many of us pivoted. You know, COVID was not an overnight thing, but we did see it coming, but it did lead to massive impact on all of us. And many of us pivoted to COVID, and we did research in that space. And in the short term, we may need to pivot to non-communicable diseases. We may need to pivot to other areas to sustain and ensure young scientists are not leaving the continent with a mass exodus to, you know, where there are better resources to enhance their careers. And so trying to pivot to ensure sustainability and retention of key people on the continent is essential. And to do this through both North-South and South-South collaboration. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you very much. And Glenda, would you like to come in with what you think we can do? And you've mentioned, perhaps pick up on what you said in the chat as well as a percentage. Thanks. Oh dear, we've lost your voice again. We'll let Glenda come back in. I see that we have Slim on the line. Sadly, we've got very little time left, Slim, but you might have picked up on some of the comments. So Slim, we've heard a lot about the impact, and obviously we're all worried. We've heard a lot about the threats of future funding goes. Let me ask you then, what strategies would you want to suggest we undertake to actually fill the void?
Yeah, very good afternoon to everybody. It's a difficult time to be in this discussion, I'm sure, with all of us. And so my thoughts are with everyone trying to grapple with this. I'm sorry I'm late. My board asked for an urgent meeting for me to provide them with guidance about what we're planning on doing and what impact this is going to have. And it's interesting, most of my board members are sitting in the same problem because the DVC of research and UCT at UWC, Deputy Vice Chancellor at UKZ, and they're all in the same boat, and they're all on my board. So we're all grappling with this. And in a way, this is an opportunity for solidarity. Solidarity where we ourselves stand together and try and figure this out as much as we can together. So I'm very thankful to ASSAf to putting this together. I think we got to look at it in both sides of the equation. On the one hand, our income is being compromised, and we need to fix that problem. On the other hand, we can't sustain our expenditure, and we have to fix that problem. So the immediate reaction everyone will have is, how do we control our expenditure? We talk about retrenchments, talk about cutting costs, and so on. I think that's a short-term way of looking at it. We need to look at it in both ways. We need to deal with the immediate problem, but actually it's also an opportunity for us to look at it in terms of solving the income problem. And that is by looking at a whole new world of funding opportunities, one that we would not normally look at. Because now we screen the NIH calls for proposals, the RFAs. Now we are screening a whole lot of other opportunities. And we've basically said to every scientist in CAPRISA, you got to put a grant in this year. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to look at how do we increase our income, not just from within South Africa, but really outside of our borders. Because the truth is that, the NIH contributes somewhere in the region of between $100 and $150 million a year to medical research in South Africa. That's far more than what our government contributes. So even if our government doubles what it provides, it can't be met. So that's going to be our challenge. So I would say, look at it both in terms of increasing income as well as decreasing expenditure. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you. And Glenda, sorry to cut you short because I need to make a few final. Could you just come in with could you come in with your last thoughts on filling the void?
So I agree that all of us are busy writing grants and are trying to find ways of sustaining this amazing ecosystem that we've built up over 20 to 30 years with the help of both the NIH, USAID, and the MRC. And I think we besides what has been mentioned, I do think we need a political intervention, both on the continent and to Europe and to the US. We've got to try and understand how we mitigate this assault on science, and how we, as a globe, respond to the current status we find ourselves in. Not only just for ourselves now, but for the future of science, and in this country and everywhere. So I'm going to just end there, Helen, because I know that time is short.
Well, thank you, and Slim, thanks for joining. And we're sad we weren't able to engage you more. But I just want to give some closing remarks. And by the way, we've got all of the comments in the chat as well. There are many comments that pick up on a lot of what I've said, as talking to ministers. What I can tell colleagues on the call is that I would say just about everyone on this call who's got the ear of a minister has been speaking to the ministers, has been speaking to Treasury, has been speaking to health departments and science and innovation, because indeed I agree that we need political solution. But I just picked up a few summary comments which I think are really important from this call. First of all, I think solidarity, Slim's last word, I think is hugely important. And I'm going to go back to what I said. We all here, and many, many more, are all saying, how do we solve this problem as a collective? How do we act? And to Becca's point, how do we act smarter in the future? We're not going to replace this kind of funding. We're going to have to think of alternative and smarter ways to optimize the income that we're getting, as you said, looking at integration of clinical research and into clinical services, of optimizing and building on what we already have. But to also work more closely, I would say, with each other, so that we all work better together. The one thing I would also say is that we've all said appreciation for both PEPFAR funds and research funds that has gone on for years from the US government, and with our US partners. And what we would say to our US research partners is, we very much want to continue to work with you. But to the US government, I mean, once the door opens, and we very much hope that door will open again, is to say, we would very much like to reopen that dialogue with you, even though it's going to be in different ways. We're also, I think, saying what the impact has been and what we're looking at. And I think the impact is profound in terms of staff, security of jobs, loss of scientific endeavor, loss of scientists, potentially, not only to the sector, but through immigration, and loss of the momentum that we have built up. That is going to be very difficult if we can't keep elements of it going to actually restore. South Africa is pivotal, as you have all said, to the African effort around research. And the African leadership through the AU are now saying, we want more research from the region and relevant research for our region. But the research we do has also hugely benefited all citizens of the world. HIV, TB, STIs, but also a lot of work going on NCDs, a lot of work on mental health, many things that are now seen as global health priorities. So our work is not only really beneficial for our region, but is also world beneficial. So I think what we would want to say to the US government is, look, we are contributing. You're very concerned about US citizenship. We believe that we are contributing to the well-being of the US citizens, and that the investments that have been made, and we hope would be made in the future, have been really well received and has really built capacity in the region. But I think in terms of the future, I think we really appreciate the MRC having a funders forum. The bilateral funders are already reaching out to us and looking at us. We've talked about pharma. We've talked about, very importantly, government investment. We said 1.5%, Glenda upped it to 2% government investment. But actually, for a political leadership here, we would really appeal to that in South Africa, but also across the region that is also being hit by that as well. And I think that we would also want to create, as we think about the solidarity, I think this is also time to pause and look at opportunity for the new and emerging threats. We've talked about emerging infectious diseases. The NCDs are going to affect us, already are affecting us just as badly now in some countries as are the infectious diseases. The pandemic threat continues. The emergence, as we've said, of mental health problems. There are many problems into the future that we need to address. So I think with that, and with thank you so much that for all of the comments, and thank you for the over 500 people who've joined us online. I would like to thank my colleagues and hand back to Prof. Majosi, who is going to make some final comments. Handing back. Thank you very much.
Yes. Sorry, Renata here. We do have time until 5 p.m.
Oh,
so, yes. So
okay, I'm cutting you all off. Okay,
yeah.
my apologies. I think okay, but I will actually start, if I may. I'd like to go back and ask Prof. Majosi, even now at this point, for his reflections. And then what I'm going to do is to pick up some of the comments in the chat as well. Prof. Majosi, you've heard the comments that have been made so far. How would you like to reflect?
Thank you very much, Helen, and thanks everyone who has contributed. Really, look, all of us are gaining a lot of exposure here, and this is the time when we should all be revisiting our past and looking into the future in a slightly different fashion. So the lens has to be slightly different. What I take from the reflections from everyone that has spoken is that we are not alone. First and foremost, we are not alone in this. South Africa is with a number of other countries who have suffered greatly through this reduction in funding. But with all this doom and gloom, I would say that there lies an opportunity for us. And I think it has been said here by a number of panelists. A few panelists have alluded to this, that perhaps the silver lining in this, this is shaking us from our comfort zone. It is saying to us, how do we diversify our sources of funding? But maybe not just diversify, how do we increase these sources of funding so that we don't find ourselves relying on a particular a funder at any given point in time. That would be sustainable for many years to come. And I think those who will come after us will be in a better place if we just achieve that. And I think that would be a silver lining. It has always worried me as a scientist that South Africa, for whatever reason, has failed to cross even the 1% barrier when it comes to our research spend per GDP. In fact, percentage-wise, we've actually decreased over time. We are sitting below 0.7% at the moment. So maybe this is a wake-up call for us that we should start thinking very seriously. If we did not do this during COVID, perhaps we should do it now, of saying, how do we invest heavily in research and move closer and closer to self-sustenance? The biggest question here, and I don't think any one of us has an answer to this question, is how do we respond now? So everything that we're talking about, including what I've just mentioned, could be viewed as long-term interventions. But what do we do now? If this does not change now, what do we do? I think perhaps the government must think very seriously. What we have closer to us, closer to home, would be our government to see how we can remedy the situation, or at least mitigate the impact of something that looks or threatens to be a humanitarian disaster, at least for South Africa. And also how we work together with the other countries on the continent to mitigate this, at least for Africa and not necessarily South Africa. So there are nuggets here of opportunities, if I can call it that, which if we look at the problem from a different end, we might exploit for the benefit of many generations to come. So for me, whilst this is definitely something to be worried about, I'm seeing a lot of opportunities if we respond accordingly. If COVID-19 is anything to go by, I think in this instance, we must respond differently in as far as how we leverage our funding potential as a country. I think that we're supposed to do a bit more. post-COVID, particularly based on what you've just said, Helen, the way the world responded when it comes to the vaccines in terms of who gets the vaccines where, how. It was very clear that those of us who cannot manufacture or were not in a position to do so were caught wanting at the time. And I thought that was a wake-up call. I thought something would happen after that. To be frank with you, I haven't seen much happening in that regard, but perhaps this is another wake-up call for us to do things differently. I think for now, I'll end there. Of course, at the end, I'll come in as well, maybe just to close. Thank you.
Thank you. So what I'm going to do, as I got my timing wrong, it gives me a chance to look at the chat. And I want to go back then to Slim in the first instance, because a couple of suggestions from the chat. And Slim, you talked about solidarity. The two suggestions I picked up from the chat, one from Ramachone Lebello, is saying that what about the private sector, the business sector? Have we approached them? And if you could just comment on what your feeling is about the private sector and their engagement or their lack of engagement in this, including what we call high net worth individuals. And then from Willem Honeycomb is to say, could we consider motivating for a southern fund, if you like, that pulls together a Southern-led foundation that pulls together the BRICS countries and a Southern-led response so that we would have an alternative source of funding. Slim, just in terms of innovation around thinking about funding, and I know you've been thinking about this, could you give us some suggestions that could address those, particularly those two comments, but your own thoughts on this?
I think what we have seen is that the Trump administration decides to home in on a target and isolates that target. If you look at the way in which the Trump administration is dealing with Columbia University, it's made a decision, okay, and you are anti-Semitic because you allow pro-Palestinian protests. And so I will cut your funding. Now, all the other institutions are running scared. And so Columbia University finds itself isolated. And that's very much how you weaken your enemy. It's the same in the attacks on Greenland, for example. You know, one of the things Greenland's doing, of course, is breaking away from Denmark. So we have to do the opposite. If the one that's trying to undermine you, attack you, is hoping you're going to get isolated and that you will become a pariah and you will have to fight this on your own, we have to show them that we can do the opposite, that we will actually fight this together with others. And among the things that we can do, that I can suggest we think about, is that we have over 250 collaborators across the world. A sizable chunk of them are American, but we are collaborating with people across all continents. So one of the things to do is to firstly inform our colleagues, if they're not aware of the challenges we face that are unique to South Africa. Remember, South Africa is not just a victim of the original executive order against foreign aid, but it's a very specific one that targets South Africa, the one that talks about egregious actions of South Africa, nonsense that it was. So it's to inform our various partners so that they can also start thinking about what is it they are doing and can they involve us in other kinds of collaborations so that they become part of helping us solve our problem. And that's just one example of what I mean by solidarity. So South Africa is not standing on its own, but many scientists from many countries are trying to be part of the solutions to what we are trying to solve. Just giving one example. I could give several others, but I thought I'd just give one to illustrate the point.
No, thank you. And just to look at this, the other thing that's come up, and Tobeka, I'm going to go to you and Glenda on this one, How do we, the motivation is in the chat is we should be giving more than 1%, we should be giving at least 2%. How do we now get the ear of the politicians? How do we really emphasize the impact? Quite rightly, the focus from the health minister has been on the impact of PEPFAR withdrawal and USAID withdrawal. But this impact is not necessarily as clearly seen in the immediate term as a health service impact. How do we actually get people to understand that this assault on higher education institutions and on the fundamentals of research, of reversing trends and advances? How would we go about that? Is this something that ASSAf could lead? Is it something the MRC could lead? Because we do need to, I don't know if we have any of our ministers online, but we do need to be able to make the point. So I'll go to Ntobeko first and then to Glenda.
Thanks, Helen. Maybe I can respond very briefly to Willem's question first around a funding platform for the Global South, but also for Southern Africa. And to say to him that many of us have been giving a lot of thought to this challenge. And as the South African Medical Research Council, we are in quite advanced discussions with government around establishment of a SAMRC foundation that may be able to reach non-traditional sources of funding and be able to complement the current funding flows into the country and significantly bolster support for the research enterprise. And we would be delighted to work with Willem if he thinks is able to contribute towards this. But to come to your question, Helen, people have to understand that one of the challenges South Africa faces as a country is that the size of our pie is exceptionally small. So out of our population of nearly 65 million people, less than 10% actually contribute to the national fiscus through taxes. And so this means that the multiple competing interests that we have as a country all need to be met in terms of the contribution to taxes from that very small contribution. And when one looks at the multiple pressures that the National Treasury faces, I think the argument is always a challenging one to convince not just ministers, but the Treasury that health research matters. And I think one compelling argument that one needs to make is that good health is fundamental for a thriving economy. If you look at the US coming out of World War II, they took a decision that in order to advance the economic standing of the country and to assure a flourishing society, they would invest both in health as well as technology. And you see how America has risen to be one of the dominant economies, but also a place of health innovation, but sadly a health system that remains unsustainably expensive and very unequal. And so I think the argument that all of us need to consistently make to our decision makers is the importance of investment in health to ensure growth of other sectors in the country, including a flourishing economy. Thanks.
Thanks. Glenda.
Yeah, I think what we need in South Africa is what I call the triple helix. We need academia together with government or policymakers, together with the private sector. And we need to see the investments in medical research as innovation. So not just upstream discovery research, but the ability to translate the great science that we do in South Africa into diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines, so that we can replenish and sustain our system of innovation. And the MRC and the NRF needs to work both with the Department of Science and Innovation, Treasury, and the Department of Health to build the business case that science, medical science, is an investment. And we know that there's a strong correlation with scientific productivity and scientific output and GDP. And so, not to invest in science is not to invest in the growth of our GDP. We do know that if we can have sustainable innovation models, it can replenish the system. And that was the idea with the MRC Foundation, and it's the idea that the National Research Foundation has. But we do need to take this to the continent. We need to take it to the African Union. We need to get a resolution on the continent that drives health innovation and science innovation on our continent, because we need a resolution at the highest African level to drive ministers of finance, treasury, departments of science and technology, and departments of health to see the value of investment in medical research and what it can do to grow economies.
Thanks. And Tess, I'll throw this question to you, because you started by explaining in quite a lot of detail the benefits that Matrix offered as a continental innovation. Given that that's been withdrawn, we also heard from Glenda that Brilliant has been withdrawn. Mosaic, which is an implementation science program, that's been withdrawn as well. How do you see, Tess, how do we sustain the continental partnerships? Slim mentioned, over 250 partners. I think that might be yourself, but I think if we added them all up between all of us, we'll probably have thousands of research partners. But Tess, specifically a question to you, how would you sustain, are there any innovations you can think to sustain African partnerships under these circumstances?
I think what we've learned over the last couple of decades, having come through post-apartheid and COVID and many other things, is that Africans by nature are resilient people, that we will find a way to emerge from this. And so we need to think innovatively. We spend so much time today talking about the impact on us, but the impact goes beyond us. And there are groups that have not experienced oppression, like those of our US partners. As much as the impact has hit us, I can speak from the Matrix perspective that many US partners, 19 different partners across the globe, institutional partners, have lost jobs, have gone into retirement, have unplanned retirement, have had to pivot to alternative means to earn livings to get to where they need to on a personal and a professional basis. I think those collaborations are strong. And I think that we've built over the years relationships with people that show people are across the continent that Africans are committed to being innovative around finding solutions for healthcare for people on our continent. And we must continue to leverage those relationships. While USG funding is impacted and NIH funding is impacted, our relationships are still there. Much learning was achieved. I think the devastation for me on a personal level for Matrix was all of the products coming through that pipeline were built to be acceptable, affordable, scalable, and deliverable in the African continent. The people remain. The model may have changed, but we need to go back to that model and find ways to connect and look at alternative mechanisms. I also sit back and think about my children and other children that are still very young and probably going to be coming into a world where the future of science is looking pretty gloomy. And I think that if we have to all step back and completely give up on an agenda, we then compromise the future generations of scientists and clinicians that are coming down the pipeline. So we have to ensure that we put back our African crowns and shake off this doom, which is really hard, I must admit, when we're from where we're sitting, but really strive to ensure that we're able to advance science, maybe not as big leaps and bounds as we would have with the American funding, but in some mechanism so that we're not taken 100 steps back in terms of what we've achieved. and we must do this together. Thanks, Helen.
I want to just go back because, well, I mean, one thing that went through is one of my favorite sayings at the moment is when you're going through hell, keep going. But I just want to go back to the comments, the question that I posed to Slim, and I want to ask him this comment, because one of the disappointments for me, I mean, I think several of us I know on this panel have spoken to the private sector in South Africa. I'm going back to South Africa. And I am not seeing several things. One is I'm not seeing a big mobilization of funds, either to replace the PEPFAR shortfall, but I haven't seen much in the way of conversation around what are already shortfalls for research and which may become worse. Secondly, I'm not sure that the private sector necessarily understands the value of research and innovation in the way that we are trying to put the case over, that it's key to the development of economies. Slim, do you think there is a way that we can actually, and again, I'm going back to Ntobeko's initiative of a funders forum, how can we pull in role players, high net worth individuals, the private sector writ large as corporates? How do we pull them in to understand the threat to our economy if we reverse the advances in research? Slim?
Yeah, thanks. Not an easy question to answer, because I think you might not like the answer in that I think at a very fundamental level, the private sector and philanthropy in South Africa have difficulty grasping the immediacy and the concrete impact of science. They think it's a bit airy-fairy. It's not something they can relate to. They can build a school, they can see the school, the kids are learning. It's something very concrete they can relate to. So several years ago, just over a decade ago, in my discussions with the Gates group, Bill offered to host a dinner in Cape Town where he would bring together philanthropy in South Africa, and he would inform them that he's donating 100 million rands to the Medical Research Council. And that was when I was president of the MRC. And he hosted a dinner at the one and only in Cape Town, and he had all the major philanthropies present. Wendy Applebaum, we had Motsepes, they were all there. And he basically outlined the value of medical science and the importance of innovation and the importance of philanthropy being part and parcel of funding it. With the idea, and he challenged them to match his 100 million rand donation. Unfortunately, we got zero. And I think we got zero because it's not something they can relate to. And the problem is that we need to have something more relatable. And I think it's the same problem with the private sector. Because we actually don't work with the private sector, they don't have a sense and understanding, and we haven't built relationships. Because that's what often is what opens doors. It's building relationships. So, they said the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Well, we didn't plant it 20 years ago. Let's plant it now. And it'll help us into the future. And I think that this is exactly the kind of situation we are in that could bring together that kind of philanthropy and the private sector interest. And many of them have philanthropies from private sector interests. And I think it's left to people like us to actually do that and to bring them together and say, let's explain to you what's going on here and what's going to now be missing and how many people may die as a result and how business may be affected, and see if that can strike the right chords. And I think if we're going to do that, we've got to do it with the imprimatur of a relationship that already exists. And I think that the relationship that revolves around the Solidarity Fund, I'm not talking about the solidarity that ran to the US to get us imposed all of this. I'm talking about the solidarity that was created by the private sector for COVID. And I think trying to do that and perhaps approaching Gloria Sorobi or Martin Kingston as a starting point to create a basis to have this discussion may be a good start. Sorry, very long-winded, but you get the gist.
No, thank you. And I have spoken to Martin Kingston early on, but I don't think there's any harm at all rethinking and consolidating on this. So I think I've got the time right now. And what I want to do is I just want to give then a second little summary. The first was summarizing my panel, but the second one is sort of the high level messages that I'm hearing. But before that, I do that, do any of my panelists want to come in with one last sentence? And Tobeka.
Maybe 2 sentences. The first is that I think as scientific leaders, we need to inspire a lot of hope in those that we engage with. And I believe in the resilience of the South African research enterprise, and difficult as the next little while will be, I think we'll be able together to navigate our way out of that. That's the first comment. The second, Helen, would be just an advertisement that the SAMRC is collaborating with the South African Journal of Science to have a dedicated issue focusing on the impact of the US funding withdrawals on different aspects of both society, but also the research enterprise, and encourage people to consider submitting brief articles that summarize their experience. Thank you so much. And thanks again to ASSAf for organizing this, and to you for chairing.
Thank you. Tess?
Maybe to end a few proverbs. So if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So please do reach out to all of us on this call. Certainly collaboration's critically important. I think the next point would be, we need to keep remembering that if you teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime versus giving him a fish just for one meal. So we can get through this. We just need to stand together and be united as we now.
Right, we're doing well on the proverbs here, I think. Glenda.
I think we need global solidarity. We need advocacy, and we need to be advocates. We need to ensure that we work within legal structures and political structures, as well as advocacy structures, to have a momentum around this assault on science.
And Slim.
Mine is one sentence, that when a door is closing, it's an opportunity to look at the other doors. So don't only look at the closing door and fixate on it. Look at all of the doors now and look at which ones among them may be opening to you.
With every crisis comes an opportunity. So let me just give a few headlines that I really heard. First of all, that I think we all agree that the suddenness of this feels like it is an assault on not only on science, but on particularly South African science, which is a leading player for the African region and which has had 30 years plus of building this up. And we do not collectively want to see that reversed. So we're talking about hope, optimism, determination, I will put in there, and solidarity. And we're also talking about a national rethink. We're saying, how do we work more smarter and more collectively? How do we rethink and become more efficient in what we do? How do we reprioritize? Several important comments in the chat on that. And how do we continue to develop our solidarity with the African region and the world, including our US collaborators and our international collaborators? I think very importantly, we're saying that we should have a collective look, and all of us can contribute to this, at alternative sources of funding, partnership, and support. And we would look to the SAMRC and ASSAf to do that. And what we have mentioned is looking at alternative partnerships, bilateral donors, the philanthropic donors, also the private sector. Let us revisit and let us also become advocates for that. And I think everyone on this call is willing to put their hand up, frankly, wherever you're calling in from. And we thank also many of our international partners who are on this call. So I think my last, as we're going for sayings, my last saying would be from, I think it was Nehru who was meant to have said this. It is because we are poor, we cannot afford not to do research. We have to do research as core to our economy, and we must take our political leadership with us in this. Let me hand over for the closing remarks to Prof. Majosi. Thank you and thanks so much to the panelists and to all those online.
Again, thanks, Helen. I'll also add to those quotes and sayings that we've been ushering out. One of them is, I think, was it Benjamin Franklin, really, who said, wars are not paid for in wartime. The bill always comes later. So if you look at the situation that we are going through now, it heightens the urgency of response, because if this doesn't change, it's very clear that the repercussions will be very dire for generations to come. So it's very, very clear from every message that we've had this afternoon that we should respond with some element of urgency. I must harp on the absence of the private sector, really. I think to our government's credit, by the way, if one looks at that less than 1% contribution, the bulk of that comes from government. Actually, more than 50% would come from government. It is really the private sector that is not coming in here and lending its weight where it matters most. So this clamor that we are hearing here, or this clarion call that we are hearing from everyone of the private sector really coming in where it's needed most, it is apt. We should really, really make more noise along those lines. But I really like the idea, which also resonates with everyone that is here, that perhaps indeed this is a time for opportunities. We should seize this moment to make sure that we take advantage of whatever opportunity there is that would come with this very, very, very dire situation. And then maybe with that, we will be in a better position for those that will come after us in South Africa, in Africa, and wherever in the world where our aspirations are equal. So I would like to end with that in as far as just the observations that were made, but also at this point, please thank everyone who has attended this webinar, your contributions that we've seen on the chat. This has enriched our dialogue, and I think there will be an avenue for taking these forward. Surely ASSAf must play a role here, SAMRC must play a role, and everyone else in the space, by the way, should play a role. For today, the emphasis was on the health sciences, but this affects everybody in the science domain, so we should realize that. I just want to thank, of course, the organizers of this webinar, which will be the ASSAf Secretariat. But foremost, really, I must thank the panelists who have availed their time to be with us this afternoon and share their expertise with us. We've gained a lot from this engagement. I just thank you, Helen, for moderating this session so well, by the way, and also recalibrating, because at some point it was as if we are coming to the end around 4:30. We had to go back to the air and be airborne again. We've landed now quite safely, and I thank you for that, Helen. I also want to thank everyone else that has played a role in this regard, whom I might have not mentioned individually. We will be having these, by the way, going forward on a number of issues that are pertinent. For now, this is arguably the pressing crisis that we are dealing with. Thank you very much, colleagues. I don't have more words to add at this stage. Suffice it to say, we'll meet again.
Thank
Prof. Majosi and colleagues, this is Himla. I just wanted to, from the Secretariat, thank Prof. Helen Rees and our panelists
But I also wanted to end that on Friday, we celebrate Human Rights Day. And I think a lot of what was discussed today is in keeping with that theme. So on behalf of everyone at ASSAf, let's do what we can to promote saving human rights issues in the country. And let's work together, as has been recommended by all on the panel and in the chat. Only if we work together will we achieve the end of the line going through all of these channels. So thank you very much.